It's hard to believe JRPGs were once a genre nobody even cared for. 15 years ago, you could jump into collecting them and prices were more than ideal. About 90% of them were quite affordable, available for laughable prices even, complete in box in mint condition. Only 10% of them were rare, but the rarest of them all wouldn't even be above the $50 range. $50 was expensive back then, but still, most people could easily afford to pay that much for a video game, especially in first world countries. Years passed and the classic Holy Grails only kept on increasing their price. Copies of Valkyrie Profile or Suikoden 2 went up slowly from $50 complete in box to $100. Still, $100 wasn't too exaggerated for a rare game. However, now less and less people were willing to pay that much for them. Others that weren't even expensive but still somewhat rare and hard to find went up to skyrocket prices without anyone noticing. All of a sudden, Kudelka was $240 coincidentally when people started caring for it. Skies of Arcadia on both the Dreamcast and the GameCube also jumped from mere $40 to no less than $150. And these are just two completely random examples out there of many JRPGs that increased in the market this much. Sure, you might think the biggest contribution to this crazy ass inflation was the pandemic, but the fact doesn't change that the genre itself has become more and more popular over the years. Gamers who couldn't care less about collecting a gem like Xenogears all of a sudden are chasing after it like possessed rabbits. But how many of them are actually paying the $150 it goes for nowadays? Many can afford that, no problem, but are they even willing to? But all of these are retro JRPGs, games that belong to the PlayStation 2 era and below. Heck, I might as well add a lot of PS3 JRPGs that are slowly beginning to enter the ridiculous market prices from this decade. I'm aware most of them decreased sometime after the pandemic was over because back then JRPGs like Folklore had surpassed the $100 range, whereas nowadays it sells for about $50. That's one thing to also consider about collecting JRPGs, that most of them went down a bit recently. They returned to a more reasonable price, but the reality is that only more recent titles did. Retro JRPGs, whether they went down or not, are still stupidly expensive and I don't see their prices crashing anytime soon. If anything, once again, little by little, they will continue to elevate. This is one of the main reasons why gamers beg companies to remaster everything nowadays. It's not just about video game preservation to bring back titles that are straight up abandoned in only one or two consoles. It's about having them available for everyone legally, if at least digital. Emulation's everyone's best friend in this day and age. There is absolutely no better video game preservation than it. So to be completely honest, I don't really care about having so-called legal ways to play old games nowadays. I want remasters or remakes not because of that, but because I think a lot of retro RPGs didn't age very well. But the large majority of them are available for anyone who doesn't think of emulation as some kind of stigma. Nevertheless, I'm also a collector like many gamers out there, and ROMs aren't what I call collectible, not even digital games. Oh yeah, I'm one of those guys. I don't believe buying a digital copy of something means you actually own it. So I want everything physical, even if it'll stop working one day several years from now. But these damn prices are beyond believable, with resellers and scalpers, especially scalpers, ruining the fun even more. That's right, it's not even fun to collect retro JRPGs anymore. What about modern JRPGs though? Well, sure, I'll give you that. It's still fun because most physical JRPGs on modern systems, such as the PS4, are dirt cheap. As cheap as the retro ones were back in the day, in the good old days of video game collecting. You can find almost any of them for between $20 or $30, more so if you wait for them to go on sale, if at least dropping their price a bit. $40 still sounds quite reasonable, doesn't it? The same cannot be said about Switch JRPGs though. Regardless of if they're exclusive to it or not, objectively speaking, it is a worldwide renowned fact that Nintendo is always more expensive than Microsoft or Sony. Sure, some games are surprisingly cheaper on the Switch than on PS4 or Xbox, but it's rare. In JRPGs, that's definitely not an exception. However, it's a fact. PS4, PS5, Xbox One and Xbox Series X JRPGs are usually cheaper than the version on the freaking Switch. So my question remains, is it fun to collect JRPGs nowadays? Is it even worth it? Retro, my opinion still stands, it's just not. I gave up this year when I realized I've only bought one single retro video game in almost 3 years, Chaos Wars on the PS2. And trust me when I say that a lot of retro games are still very affordable, true, but JRPGs? Maybe just a few. Refer to these videos I've done in the past with several retro recommendations that are still decently priced. Most PS3 and 360 JRPGs are also still decently priced, by the way, just not the very obscure ones on PS3. You can just forget about the Wii, the Nintendo DS and the PSP. Most JRPGs in there are not fun to collect anymore. And I don't even see those systems exactly as retro yet, but I'm slowly starting to. Modern JRPGs, however, yes, it's still fun, very fun. I'd say stick to those and wait for more physical versions of JRPGs remastered in the past few years to exist, or beg the publishers to print them, I don't know. My point remains the same, it's fun to collect modern JRPGs despite Nintendo being an asshole with some Switch JRPG exclusives, but it's definitely not, at least not for me, to collect retro JRPGs. It's over. That's all for today, guys. Thanks for watching.